It was a typical hot summer afternoon when Maya Lawson, a 17-year-old high school senior, walked into the courtroom. Despite her youth, she carried herself with a confidence that seemed out of place in such a formal setting. Maya had been working part-time in a law firm for the past year, studying legal papers and shadowing attorneys, while her friends spent their time at parties and summer vacations. But this wasn't just another day for Maya. It was the day she would have to face a case that meant something much bigger than her own personal ambitions. Maya had grown up with a deep sense of justice, one that was rooted in her desire to make a difference in the world. And today, in the courtroom, she was here to represent herself. Not as a teenager, but as a brilliant young attorney in disguise. However, Judge Harrison, a middle-aged man with years of experience, wasn't about to take her seriously. The moment Maya stood up to present her case, Judge Harrison chuckled under his breath. He had seen countless young people in his courtroom, often students who thought they could represent themselves in legal matters, and he had seen them fail miserably. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Maya, his eyes narrowing in mockery. "A teenager in my courtroom?" he muttered, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "This should be good. Do you even know what you're doing?" Maya felt the sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. She'd been underestimated all her life, especially because of her age and the color of her skin. But that had only made her stronger. She knew the law, and she was ready to prove it. With calm confidence, she began her argument, clearly articulating her points. The judge's smirk grew wider as he continued to dismiss her every word, believing it was just an innocent mistake, a young girl playing lawyer. The gallery whispered in disbelief, uncertain about whether Maya would even survive the first round of objections. But she was used to doubting stares and whispered judgments. Maya's strength wasn't in her appearance, but in her knowledge, determination, and unwavering belief in what was right. She didn't need their approval to fight for justice. She knew she was already capable. She finished speaking and stood silently, waiting for the judge's reaction. But instead of dismissing her, Judge Harrison leaned forward. Something in his eyes flickered. Was it respect, or was it fear? "Well, I must say I'm surprised. You've done your homework," the judge finally acknowledged, his voice laced with begrudging admiration. "But don't think I'm going to let you off easy just because you can argue a case. You've still got a long way to go." But Maya wasn't done yet. She smiled, calm but determined, and looked directly at him. "I'm not here for your approval, Judge. I'm here to make sure that the truth is heard and that justice is served." And with that, Maya Lawson became more than just a teenager in a courtroom. She became a force to be reckoned with. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence after Maya's confident declaration. Judge Harrison, still taken aback by her poise, slowly leaned back in his chair, silently eyeing the young girl who had just stood up to him so effortlessly. He wasn't sure if he should dismiss her again or actually pay attention to her argument. His pride had been momentarily bruised, but he wasn't about to let a teenager outsmart him. The witnesses on the stand shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was happening, while Maya stood tall, undeterred. Maya knew she had to play her cards carefully. She had the facts, but it wasn't just about the law. It was about showing them all that respect and justice weren't just for the adults in the room. She had to command the courtroom without saying another word. She had already made her point. She wasn't here to be underestimated. With measured steps, she reached into her bag, pulling out an unassuming briefcase. The room watched her curiously, unsure of what she was doing. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly wondering how this was going to play out. With a deliberate slowness, Maya opened the briefcase, revealing a neatly organized set of legal documents. She flipped them open, pulling out a single official-looking folder, and walked toward the bench. The entire courtroom watched, their eyes widening as she placed it on the judge's desk. "Your Honor, I'm not just here as a law student. I'm not just here as a high school senior. I'm here as a future attorney, and I know exactly what I'm doing," Maya said, her voice calm yet firm. Judge Harrison furrowed his brow, glancing at the file in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, his tone still condescending. Maya smiled slightly, the tension in the air thickening. "This, Your Honor, is the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that directly supports my case." She paused for a moment, watching his expression change as he processed her words. She had just turned the tables on him, without ever needing to raise her voice. The judge opened the folder, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he skimmed through the legal documents. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief. His earlier arrogance was starting to slip away. The evidence in front of him was irrefutable, and what Maya had presented was nothing short of impressive. "You've got to be kidding me," Judge Harrison muttered under his breath. His smug demeanor was quickly being replaced by doubt. He glanced back up at Maya, who had remained completely composed, and his respect for her grew by the second. He had underestimated her from the moment she walked in, and now he was beginning to realize just how badly. Maya stood still, watching as Judge Harrison flipped through the pages of the Supreme Court ruling she had handed him. The room was now entirely silent, the power dynamic shifting completely. She had already shown them all that she wasn't just a teenager, she was a force to be reckoned with. "This ruling?" Judge Harrison's voice trailed off. He looked up at her, his tone more respectful than before, almost apologetic. "I stand corrected, Ms. Lawson. I can see now that you're well prepared." Maya nodded, her eyes calm but determined. "Respect is earned, Your Honor, not given because of age or status." The judge nodded slowly, his posture straightening as he gave her the respect she had long deserved. But Maya wasn't done yet. She hadn't just come here to prove a point to the judge. She was here to change the narrative about young people, about race, and about respect in the courtroom. Maya returned to her seat, and the room continued to buzz with quiet whispers. The judge cleared his throat, visibly adjusting to his new position of humility. The spectators were no longer just passive observers. They had witnessed something rare, something important. A young woman, dismissed and belittled at first, who had turned the tables and commanded respect through nothing but her knowledge and resolve. "Ms. Lawson, I must admit, I've learned something today," Judge Harrison said quietly, without the usual authority in his voice. "You've certainly earned my respect, and the respect of everyone here." Maya nodded, her eyes unwavering. This was just the beginning. The air in the courtroom had changed. The tension, which had been thick only moments before, had now given way to a new energy, a mixture of respect, uncertainty, and awe. Maya Lawson, who had entered the courtroom that morning, uncertain of how her case would go, was now standing tall as the center of attention. She wasn't just the defendant's lawyer, she had become a symbol of underdog strength and resilience. As Judge Harrison shuffled through the documents, Maya could sense the shift not only in him, but in the entire room. The spectators, who had likely come to watch a routine case, were now completely engaged, and the other attorneys at the table were no longer looking at her with skepticism. They were watching her with respect and curiosity. The judge finally looked up from the documents, his hands resting on the bench. "Ms. Lawson, I must admit, you've completely caught me off guard. You've made your case exceptionally well." The entire room was silent, waiting for Maya's response. Maya wasn't interested in just being congratulated. She wanted to make sure her message was clear. Respect and fairness weren't just things she expected. These were non-negotiables. She had already been underestimated because of her age and her race, but she had just proven that both those things didn't define her abilities. "Thank you, Your Honor, but I'd like to remind the court that this case is bigger than me, or my age, or my gender. It's about the system and how it treats those who are most often overlooked," Maya said, standing her ground. Her voice was steady and confident, but there was a certain warmth in it too. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had ever been dismissed based on their appearance or background. The judge, and who was now sitting upright and clearly respecting the young attorney, nodded. "I understand, and you've made that very clear. I am grateful for your insights." The moment wasn't lost on the courtroom. The power dynamics had shifted completely. Judge Harrison, who had entered the courtroom expecting to dominate as always, was now humbled by this brilliant young woman who had, with nothing but her intelligence, left him reevaluating his assumptions. Just as the judge prepared to adjourn the case for deliberation, Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but full of purpose. "There is still one more point I'd like to address, Your Honor." The judge looked up at her, clearly intrigued. "Go ahead, Ms. Lawson." Maya pulled out another set of documents from her briefcase, which had remained open on the table. As she carefully placed them on the desk, she explained, "These documents further substantiate the evidence that has been overlooked. I've reviewed the case thoroughly and believe there are significant inconsistencies that need to be addressed. The judge's eyebrows furrowed as he began reading the new documents. The room remained silent. Maya's ability to provide concrete proof of the case's flaws was not just impressive, it was decisive. The judge's initial mockery seemed miles away, replaced by a palpable sense of regret for not having taken Maya seriously from the beginning. "This is remarkable, Ms. Lawson," Judge Harrison said, his voice tinged with admiration. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. "You've done something I've never seen before. You've shown me, and everyone here, what true professionalism looks like." Maya didn't allow herself to get caught up in the praise. Instead, she nodded and spoke directly to the jury, who were quietly observing the entire exchange. "This case isn't about me being a teenager or a woman. It's about the truth and accountability. It's about recognizing the biases that exist and working to correct them, not just in this courtroom, but in every courtroom." With that statement, she had completely shifted the focus of the trial. It wasn't just a legal battle now. It was a battle for fairness, for change, and for a future where justice wasn't a privilege for the few, but a right for all. As the silence hung in the air, the weight of Maya's words took root in the minds of everyone present. The jury members exchanged glances, visibly affected by the young woman's sharp analysis and conviction. Even the spectators in the gallery, who had initially come to watch the trial as a mere formality, now understood the importance of what was at stake. This wasn't just a case, it was a moment of transformation in the courtroom, and everyone in it was part of something bigger than themselves. Judge Harrison, once smug and dismissive, was now caught in a quiet reflection. He had been forced to acknowledge not only the brilliance of Maya, but also the stark reality of his own biases. For years, he had allowed his position of power to influence his judgments, often making assumptions about the people who appeared before him based on race or age. But now, in the face of a young woman who had defied his expectations, the truth was undeniable. Justice couldn't be based on assumptions. It had to be grounded in facts. With a deep breath, he addressed the room, his voice more measured than before. "I must admit, I've never had a case like this, nor have I ever been reminded so powerfully of the principles that should guide every decision we make in this courtroom." The jury was silent, their eyes still locked on Judge Harrison. They had witnessed his arrogance earlier, but now they were seeing a man grappling with his own shortcomings, a man realizing that the power he had once wielded with impunity was no longer unquestioned. Maya, who had been quiet during the judge's admission, nodded thoughtfully. She wasn't here for an apology or validation. She was here for something more profound. Maya had come to understand that the battle for justice didn't end with winning a case. It was about changing the culture and attitudes that permeated every level of the legal system. As the judge stood up to announce the next steps, his tone was more reflective. "Ms. Lawson, I believe we've reached the conclusion that the case is not just about the defendant, but also about us, about what we stand for and how we treat others, regardless of their background. I will take full responsibility for my actions and ensure that the truth is heard." Layla's expression didn't change. She simply nodded and turned back to face the jury. Her work wasn't over, but this victory felt more significant than any legal win she had ever imagined. It was a win for fairness, for accountability, and most importantly, for the people who had been silenced for too long. The trial continued, but the balance had already shifted. With Maya's quiet but powerful intervention, the narrative had changed. What had once seemed like a typical courtroom battle had now evolved into a revolution of thought, where the system itself was forced to acknowledge its flaws. As Maya began to present the closing arguments, the respect in the room was palpable. Every eye was on her, and for the first time that day, the judge didn't interrupt her. He listened, not as an adversary, but as a man who understood the weight of the words she spoke. Every question she asked, every statement she made, now carried an undeniable power. It wasn't about the law, it was about what the law should be. Maya had already made her point, but the final act of the trial was about to unfold. As Judge Harrison sat there, the arrogant smirk on his face slowly faded as he realized the weight of the situation. The teenager he had mocked was about to change everything. As the trial continued, Maya confidently approached the judge's bench. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope containing something no one expected. With all eyes on her, she calmly walked up to Judge Harrison and placed the envelope in front of him. "Your Honor, I believe there's something here you've overlooked." The judge raised an eyebrow, barely interested in what she was doing. "What's this?" "This, Your Honor, is a signed affidavit from one of the most senior legal experts in the field. I'd also like to submit the Supreme Court ruling that directly supports my case." Maya spoke clearly and confidently, her voice ringing through the courtroom. The judge's expression shifted from dismissive to intrigued as he skimmed the documents. The crowd was silent as they watched the young woman, who had been underestimated completely, change the tone of the room. Maya Lawson wasn't just a teenager. She was a brilliant attorney in disguise. Judge Harrison blinked, his mouth slightly open, processing the documents in front of him. For the first time, he looked directly at Maya, who stood her ground, watching him. "You've done your homework, haven't you?" he muttered under his breath. With a nod, Maya responded, "I don't just argue cases, Your Honor. I understand them, and I respect the law." The judge, now humbled, slowly straightened his posture. He looked back at the jury and spoke with a newfound humility. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have all learned something today." He glanced back at Maya, his voice steady but with a hint of admiration. "This trial has shown me that true knowledge and integrity can come from any place, regardless of age or appearance. I apologize for my earlier assumptions, Ms. Lawson. You've earned my respect." The courtroom was quiet for a moment before the jury nodded in agreement. Maya had not just won the case, she had won respect. The judge, once arrogant, was now deeply aware of his own biases, and his decision going forward would be far more careful. The case was ruled in favor of Maya's client, but the true victory had already been won. Maya had broken through prejudice, not with force or anger, but with wisdom, patience, and sheer determination. As she left the courtroom, the respect in the room followed her. Maya wasn't just a teenager anymore. She had shown the world that true power comes from knowledge and the courage to stand up for what is right. The courtroom was electric, the air thick with anticipation. It had been hours since the trial began, but no one in the room could tear their eyes away from the proceedings. Maya Lawson had not only turned the tables, but had redefined what justice, fairness, and respect meant in that courtroom. The judge, who had once mocked her, now sat in humble silence, fully aware of the profound impact she had on the room. As Maya finished her closing arguments, she knew the battle was no longer just about the case at hand. It was about something far greater, the way the legal system would operate moving forward. She had shown everyone in the room that age, race, and background didn't define a person's capability. What mattered was integrity, knowledge, and the willingness to fight for what's right. Judge Harrison, for the first time in the trial, took a moment to pause before speaking. He cleared his throat and addressed the jury in a steady voice, one that carried a newfound weight. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge the power of what we've witnessed today. In all my years on the bench, I have never encountered a moment that has so thoroughly changed my perspective. Ms. Lawson, you've reminded me of the fundamental truth we should all hold to, no matter our station or title. The law is not something to be wielded for personal gain. It is a tool for justice, a tool that must be wielded with fairness and respect for all." The room grew silent as the jury sat, visibly moved by the judge's rare moment of vulnerability and reflection. Maya had not only proved her brilliance as an attorney, she had shown the entire courtroom the power of empathy and justice when they were allowed to take center stage. She wasn't here to claim victory for herself. She was here to change the system. The judge continued, "I've made mistakes today. I've made assumptions that I deeply regret. But one thing is certain, I won't make those mistakes again." He turned to the jury, who was now fully engaged. "I trust you all to make a decision that reflects what we've learned today, the truth and the courage to stand by it, no matter the odds." The jury deliberated for only a short time, but the decision was clear. Guilty. The defendant had been proven to be in the wrong. But for Maya, the verdict was secondary to what had truly been accomplished. She had shaken the foundations of the courtroom, and that in itself was a victory. When the verdict was read, Maya felt no joy in the outcome. Her heart wasn't tied to the result of the case. It was tied to the change that had taken place. She had won the battle for respect. She had fought to prove that everyone deserved to be treated fairly, and she had succeeded. As the courtroom emptied, Maya stood, her face calm but filled with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done something that matters. The people in that room, those who had doubted her, mocked her, and dismissed her, were leaving with a lesson they would never forget. For Judge Harrison, the trial was more than just a case. It was the beginning of a personal transformation. He left the courtroom that day with a deep sense of humility, determined to ensure that respect and fairness would be his guiding principles going forward. He had been reminded of the true meaning of justice by a young woman who had seen through his arrogance and turned the tables in the most extraordinary way. As for Maya, this was just the beginning. She had made her mark. She had proven that age and race didn't limit a person's potential. But more than anything, she had shown that true power lies not in who you are, but in what you stand for. Justice, integrity, and respect. These were the values she carried forward, and with them, she would change the world.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.